Well, I am so thankful to have again with me Dr. Maurice Robinson, an expert in textual criticism and a person who takes a Byzantine priority approach. And so I've got a couple objections against the Byzantine priority position I want to put towards Dr. Robinson here and kind of get his response. And so, Dr. Robinson, the first question that I have is why are not more scholars on board with the idea of Byzantine priority?
It's hard to go against the flow to start with. And since a non-Byzantine position, or even previously a vehemently anti-Byzantine position, has tended to be the norm since the days starting with Lockman or Tregelles, and then Westcott and Hort, and then their followers, it sort of set the pattern that the earliest manuscripts should be considered the best. They are not Byzantine, and therefore the Byzantine should be regarded as late, secondary, and then originally when they were saying it under Kurt Aland and others, not even worth dealing with. For example, when he developed his methodology for text and textvert, where they had the test passages, the test stellen, he actually was using the method to see which manuscripts are the most Byzantine so that he wouldn't have to deal with them when he's dealing with the critical establishment of the Editio Critica Maior. So it started that way. Now with the rise of the CBGM, of course, there is a new view regarding the Byzantine text, which says that yes, many cases it may have original readings. And of course, Klaus Wachtel is one of the leaders in promoting this point of view. And in fact, the various Editio Critica Maior versions that are coming out now are accepting some Byzantine readings. A very, very small minority, but at least the Byzantine text is no longer anathema, but it is being, if you want to say, minutely rehabilitated. But again, it's not the majority view. It's not likely to be the majority view. And those who want to hold to an opposing position are going to always probably be in the minority as long as the flow keeps going the way it does. For example, there are those that are supporting the Western text right now, whether we're talking Jenny Heimerdinger or various others in France, Amfou and Duplessis and others like that. Those who support the Western text are in a minority as well, but as you notice from their own publications, they keep on plugging along. So do I.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I asked, I sent a message to a textual critic, Dr. Peter Gurry. I'm sure you know him.
Right.
And what really surprised me is, I was as a total layperson, I was under the impression that, there were the hundreds of textual critics. And in reality, we're talking not hundreds of textual critics. We're probably talking about, 2 or 3 score of people who are really trained, who are publishing in the field. So when we're talking about a minority, when we're talking about a handful of people, in reality, there's not really that many people who are qualified in the field of textual criticism. Am I right about that? I might have misinterpreted Dr. Gurry, but would you concur with something like that?
It probably all depends on what the nature of qualified is. There actually are, if you go back through the various journals for the last 100 years, there are hundreds of articles by different people that have been written regarding individual textual variants and taking a stand either for this or that or another reading, and whether they're Byzantine, Western, Alexandrine, or whatever. The hundreds of articles are out there, but most of these people are probably not recognized as textual critics. Those who have had these particular training in the field and studied already under known textual critics, yes, they are probably a few dozen. That's what we're getting to. In Münster in 2008, the Institute there had a conference where they had invited all the leading text critics around the world to attend, and I was there among others. Dan Wallace was there, and someone said at that conference that if for any reason a bomb were to go off in that meeting, the textual criticism as a discipline would cease to exist.
Wow.
So, and that was limited to just, like I said, a few dozen people.
Wow. Wow. Well, something that kind of strikes me is that there are a lot of people who have learned a little bit from like seminary about reasoned eclecticism, and then they're doing their own, they're deciding what variant they're going to go with based on that limited training that they have. It's hard for me to believe that a person who's had a semester's worth of, uh, or just read one or two books on textual criticism. Let's say reasoned eclecticism is correct. It's hard for me to believe that they're really in a good position to be making text critical decisions for themselves if reasoned eclecticism were true.
Allowing for that, I have to admit, I taught text criticism courses in seminary, and certain of my students went on and have gone to their doctorates, and they have even majored in the field. For example, we had one of my students, Ed Gravely, who did his dissertation on the umlauts in Codex Vaticanus. We had my other PhD student, Abadan Shah, who has done his work on the supposed moving the goalposts regarding textual criticism over the last 50 years, moving into a more postmodern view of the discipline. But most of the students that took textual criticism learned a little bit about reasoned eclecticism, thoroughgoing eclecticism, and also the Westcott-Hort system, which is more documentary based, and then, of course, my own Byzantine priority, as well as even the majority text positions of Hodges Farstad or Pickering. Most of those never went any further, and what they learned in that class was just a mixture of all the different views, and it sort of left them, in the end, they're going to end up choosing whichever view they want to follow. And I have a feeling that maybe in some cases, some people will be all over the map as to what variants they choose. And for the average pastor, maybe he chooses the variant that he thinks best will fit the message that he's about to deliver. And I have an easier solution than that. I'd just say make sure you get a special coin to flip whenever you get a variant, and then take whichever variant the coin settles down on.
Well, I think that's my concern. I think that there's some people doing amateur textual criticism, and they're correcting. If they take a reasoned eclecticism view, they're correcting their UBS and their NA28 or whatever with what. I mean, really, the average pastor, how many of those manuscripts that are listed in the Nestle text does the average pastor even recognize? And
Right.
let alone know the particular scribal habits of those manuscripts. So that's, yeah.
Well, Gordon Fee, in his first edition of his book, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, actually said, when he started talking in the little paragraph about textual criticism, he flat out said, the best text has already been determined by the scholars, so you don't have to worry about it.
Interesting. Well, let me put one more objection to you on this video. And this comes from Dr. Wallace's article. This is a quote from him. The majority text and the original text, are they identical? He says, he asserts that none of the versions produced in the first 3 centuries was based on the Byzantine text. Is that a devastating argument against the Byzantine priority?
Not for me, but the thing is that Dan Wallace and I, of course, we know each other quite well, and we have a mutual opposition society. The statement is correct that until you get to the Gothic version, which is going to be in the 4th century, and then later versions after that, you do not have a thoroughly Byzantine ancient version. However, I am like the Reformation people with the concept of ad fontes. The fountain of the Byzantine text is in Greek. The original language is in Greek. The original manuscripts would have been perpetuated in Greek. So to establish the Byzantine text, I don't do that from the versions. I don't do that from the church fathers, who are themselves all over the place. And the ancient versions themselves are all over the place because, except for the Coptic versions, even they are not systematically Alexandrian in nature. So I'm working with the Byzantine text as established from the Greek manuscripts. And therefore, I am not worrying about the versions except as confirmatory toward the Byzantine reading when they can be adduced for such. When they differ from the Byzantine reading, a version could have multiple reasons for any divergencies that it might happen to make. They can be translational issues. They could be coming in from combining other texts. We don't even know, in many cases, exactly where the versional testimony is coming from. And just to add on that, on the patristic testimony, everybody that reads the handbooks knows the fathers can quote from memory. They don't quote the same passage exactly, sometimes 3 or 4 times differently, and sometimes they only quote part of a passage. And all of these kind of things, whether versions or in patristics, are reflecting a lesser text than what should be able to be established from the Greek manuscripts themselves. So from the ad fontes concept, I am going to see the Byzantine text established from a Greek manuscript base. And that's why, even as the handbooks really should say, the versions and the fathers are in the nature secondary witnesses.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, Dr. Robinson, you've been very generous with your time, and I'm glad to have you on today. And we covered a couple of the objections, and maybe in a future video we can get to some more. But it's been great to have you on today.
Very good. I enjoy it.
All right. Thanks.